Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news. Eskom has given an update on its repowering projects under its Just Energy Transition Strategy. Terence Creamer joins me to talk about the pipeline. Hi, Terence. What is the background to this repowering initiative?
Well, South Africa made an offer some years back at the Glasgow COP where we said we were going to decarbonise our electricity system, and we set a framework in place that we were going to start retiring power stations. But we packaged it in such a way that we offered it to the international community to say, can't you support us in that decarbonisation effort, but also in a just energy transition strategy type of way, where we support near power station communities and workers. And the idea, therefore, was to have both repowering and repurposing projects in and around existing power stations that were going to be retired by, at that stage, 2027. So we became sort of the inaugural Just Energy Transition Partnership internationally. So there was an international partner group that got set up around us. Since then, obviously, the geopolitics has changed quite dramatically. So one of the members of that group was the US. They, as you know, have withdrawn from not only the JET strategy, but USAID as a big part of, supporting, say, for instance, South Africa's AIDS antiretroviral drug rollout. So that's changed. But on the whole, that partnership remains intact. And Eskom has offered this package to repower. But it also we had that very intense period of load shedding subsequent to the COP in Glasgow, and we've delayed the decommissioning of our power station. So we had to then send that repackage with the power stations now only decommissioning in 2030, these 6 power stations. And still, whether that could still form part of whether the repowering of project could still form part of the funding envelope, particularly out of the CIF, which is a World Bank-linked group. And just last week we heard a positive response from the CIF that they would continue to support and provide $500 million to these, partly to these repowering projects, as that would crowd in a total of $2.6 billion.
Eskom says it has a project pipeline of 5 gigawatts.
That's correct. So these power stations, the sort of flagship was Komati, and that's become a political hot potato because Komati, it was right on, it was already ready for decommissioning. It wasn't producing very much electricity, but was shut before any of these repowering or repurposing projects really gained any sort of scale. So there has been some very small, modest level of repowering, but mostly repurposing, sort of projects around reskilling, assembling microgrids in containers, and that sort of thing that's happened around Komati. But it became a major focus area and has been highlighted as something of a failure. The Presidential Climate Commission has put out a report that is tries to balance that and say, yes, the sequencing wasn't great, but actually all the effort, the upfront effort, the consultation, all that work was very important and remains important as we try and do the repowering in a number of power stations. Eskom has rejigged its Just Energy strategy to try and have a sort of front-end loading to the repowering project. So now it's got mostly solar, PV and battery energy storage projects at these power stations, and it's sort of Camden, Grootvlei, Hendrina, Kriel and Komati. And these are all power stations that are going to be decommissioned or retired really by 2030 now. And there are, however, a couple of wind projects in that mix. And interestingly, at Kriel, they've also added a gas-to-power dimension, 1,000 megawatts. So there's a lot now that is much more advanced, and we're starting to see some of the requests for proposals going out, both from those old power stations as well as power stations that aren't really up for retirement immediately, like Letabo. But those are starting to come out, and Eskom has set up this sort of energy, green, renewable business that is sort of a separate unit that is operating within the what is still a utility, but was also going through a massive restructuring and an unbundling that will have a very reinvented look in a few years' time.
How will this be implemented and funded?
So the implementation, I think Eskom is saying, they've got balance sheet stresses. We as taxpayers have had to bail out Eskom a number of times. They still, sort of trading under the most recent bailout that was extended in the form of a debt relief package in the last year of that. So they need to, one, rely on partnerships with IPPs, and that's what this renewable business is all about, setting up partnerships with IPPs that will invest in these projects, co-invest in these projects. But they also package this very much to access this JET IP, or the JET implementation part of the country plan, which has a number of dimensions, not only electricity, it also has new energy vehicles and green hydrogen, but the mainstay is actually electricity, and the mainstay within that is actually the transmission structure, but also the repowering projects that are starting to now take shape. So there's a number of these projects that are going to be packaged, put out to tender in some form, set up partnerships around. The first one we haven't seen yet take shape, so we have to see really how it all comes together. That's going to be something to watch. But the funding, part of the funding, is going to come from this international partnerships group. There's a sort of still, even after the US exit, there's still sort of a $12.5 billion envelope. Some of that has been already extended in the form of policy loans, which go straight into the national treasury, which helps lower our cost of debt. But the rest of that, some of that, is going to be specifically available, and that's why that SIF decision of the board last week was so crucial, that 500 million sort of base load of financing is available that will crowd in other multilateral development finance institutions and these private partners, those investors, into these projects.
There's also a repurposing dimension to the JET strategy.
Yes. So as I mentioned earlier, that the repurposing, with some of that, has started to take place. It's on a bit of a small scale still, but this is a sort of part of a view that as these power stations transition from the old integrated situation where they'd have a mining operation, there'd be a lot of jobs in that. There'd be a transport dimension. Generally, these were initially conveyor belts, but there were some jobs in that. And then the power station itself, which was a multi-decade asset, so there'd be jobs in that. As they close, all those are at risk, and the communities that around that are at risk. So some of those jobs will be absorbed in actually producing electricity, but it won't be all of the jobs. So the idea is to have also other programs. There's been a big focus in Mpumalanga around agriculture and using mine land in some ways and power station land as an opportunity there. So there's some of that. There's an agrivoltaics micro project underway. There's the containerization of microgrids that Eskom is hoping to scale up, and government is starting to integrate that into its electrification rollout. So we're seeing some of these containers going into communities, far-flung communities. Then there's a big push globally, whenever there's just energy transition is spoken about, big push for reskilling. So helping people that may be transitioning from power into, say, agriculture or into some sort of manufacturing or micro-manufacturing activity. That's a big focus. And then enterprise development, sort of helping grow businesses in these areas that were sort of very much linked to the power stations. It's a sort of a bit of a Hail Mary. It's a difficult thing, but it's something that other countries have tried to do around where they can see long life assets retiring. And South Africa is sort of now sort of the flagship in many ways of a developing economy doing it. There are others doing it as well. Indonesia is caught up and probably has surpassed South Africa, but things are happening. And so it's going to be one to watch. There's a lot of skepticism around it, both the repowering and the repurposing. But I think there is this lower cost capital that will help Eskom to try and do some of this work, and hopefully in partnership with others we'll start seeing some of the fruits.
Thank you. That's the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis. Also, don't forget to listen to the audio version of our Engineering News Daily email newsletter.